So the map of northern air power just changed. For the first time in 75 years, American fighter jets are no longer the backbone of NATO's Arctic defense. A Swedish fighter armed with British missiles is Sweden. Sweden just deployed Gripen fighters to lead NATO's Arctic air policing from Iceland, carrying British-made Meteor missiles that the Pentagon's $2 trillion F-35 program still can't fire. The Gripen costs a quarter of the F-35 to operate, can launch from 800 meters of frozen highway, and just completed AI autonomous combat flights that the F-35 hasn't attempted. And the Pentagon's response has been to dispatch senior officials to every Nordic capital with one message: please don't stop buying our fighter. When the world's largest military starts asking allies to keep buying, you know who's winning. Warren Buffett, who has spent 60 years studying how organizations allocate capital, was asked about the F-35 versus Gripen. And what he said about capital allocation at the national level is going to change how you think about defense spending forever. When the world's greatest investor calls a $2 trillion weapons program the worst capital allocation in the history of government, you need to hear why. Finland, Norway, Denmark, the UK, nations that form NATO's entire northern flank, are all deepening their relationship with the Swedish-British Gripen program. Ukraine wants 150 of them. Canada is reconsidering its F-35 order. The order book for Saab just hit an all-time record, and the Pentagon has moved to emergency procurement reviews, sweetened F-35 pricing, and rushed Arctic deployments. The institutional behavior of an organization that knows it's losing market share in the most critical theater on earth. Subscribe now, because this is the story of how a country of 10 million people armed with British technology and German AI is redrawing the map of northern air power, and the Pentagon can't stop it. To understand why this reshaping matters, you need to understand the architecture it's replacing. Because for 75 years, NATO's northern air defense was built around one country's fighters, one country's systems, and one country's control. Since NATO's founding in 1949, the alliance's air power architecture has been designed, built, and led by the United States. American fighters, the F-86, the F-104 Starfighter, the F-16, and now the F-35, have been the standard across Allied air forces for 3 generations. American airborne command systems direct the air battle. American tankers provide aerial refueling. American logistics chains provide the spare parts, the software updates, the maintenance expertise, and the technical support that keep Allied fighters in the air. For 75 years, if you wanted to defend the Arctic, you bought American, flew American, and maintained American. Your pilots trained on American systems. Your mechanics used American tools. Your software needed American updates. The architecture provided defense. It also provided control. And that control was strategic, not accidental. American fighters bind allies to American logistics chains, American political cycles, and American foreign policy priorities. When Washington decides to slow walk spare parts or delay a software update, Allied air forces degrade with no alternative source of support. The F-35 deepened this dependency to unprecedented levels. The jet's autonomous logistics information system phones home to Lockheed Martin servers for software authentication. Without American software authorization, the F-35 cannot fly combat missions. That isn't a design flaw. It's a feature that gives the United States unilateral control over when and whether Allied nations can use their own fighters. The F-35 isn't just a fighter jet. It's a subscription service, and the United States controls the terms. Every F-35 operator is a customer who can be turned off. This architecture was acceptable when American leadership was reliable, when alliance commitments were stable, and when American defense procurement delivered working products on reasonable timelines. The F-35 program challenged all 3 of those assumptions simultaneously. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the most expensive weapons program in human history, has a lifetime cost exceeding $2 trillion. That number is not a projection or an estimate. It's the Government Accountability Office's calculation, and it has been revised upward every single time the GAO has looked at it. Sustainment costs alone rose from $1.1 trillion in 2018 to $1.58 trillion in 2020-2023, a 44% increase in 5 years. And the Pentagon's response was not to fix the cost problem, but to plan to fly the jets less. Block 4 modernization, the upgrade package that was supposed to make the F-35 the fighter it was always promised to be, is $6 billion over budget and 5 years behind schedule. The TR-3 hardware and software upgrade is 3 years late. It was supposed to be ready in April 2023, and the Pentagon still doesn't have a firm delivery date. Deliveries were halted entirely for a full year from July 2023 to July 2024 because jets coming off the production line lacked the software to fly in combat. Dozens of brand new fighters sat in storage at Lockheed's Fort Worth facility, built but unable to perform their basic mission. The Pentagon eventually accepted an interim software version just to avoid the security risk of having a 100 high-value military aircraft parked together in one location. The fleet's mission readiness rate sits at 55%, meaning nearly half the time the most expensive fighter in the world is sitting in a hangar instead of defending airspace. The Pentagon's own target of 65% readiness has never been achieved in the program's history. Pratt Whitney, the sole engine manufacturer, hasn't delivered a single engine on schedule in the last 2 years, averaging 155 days late per power plant. And the GAO found that the Pentagon has been paying Lockheed Martin hundreds of millions of dollars in performance incentive fees, bonuses designed to reward on-time delivery for jets that were delivered late. Bonuses for late work, that's not procurement. That's tribute. And procurement is collapsing from 86 jets purchased in fiscal year 2024 to just 47 inches fiscal year 2026. The Air Force requested just 24, half of the prior year's plan. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force said publicly that the service won't resume full F-35 purchases until the fighter is, in his words, most relevant for the fight. That's the head of the Air Force saying on the record that the F-35 is not currently relevant for the fight it was built to win. The F-35 was supposed to be the fighter that cemented American air power dominance for the 21st century. 3,000 jets across 17 nations, all dependent on American systems, all locked into American supply chains. Instead, it gave NATO a reason to look for something else. And what NATO found in a country of 10 million people armed with British technology and designed for the frozen north is reshaping the map of air power across the alliance's most critical theater. Sweden designed the Gripen to fight the Soviet Union, not with American help, not with American planes. On its own, with a population of 10 million and a defense budget, a fraction of what Washington spends on catering, the design philosophy was existential. If the Soviets invade, every air base in Sweden gets destroyed in the first hour of the war. The fighter must operate from dispersed locations, 800 meters of straight road, forest clearings, frozen highway strips, anywhere flat enough to land and short enough to hide. 1 0-minute turnaround. Land, refuel, rearm, relaunch with a crew of 6 conscripts, not specialized technicians trained for months. Conscripts trained in days. Software-defined architecture capability upgrades deployed in days through software updates, not years through hardware retrofits. The engineers at SAB say it plainly. We can change what the Gripen does without changing what it is. The Gripen wasn't designed to win air shows or impress defense analysts at conferences. It was designed to survive a war against a superpower. Every decision, the dispersed operations, the quick turnaround, the modular software, the low maintenance requirements was made by engineers who expected their country to fight for its survival. And that design philosophy, born from Swedish existential pragmatism, turns out to be exactly what NATO needs in the Arctic. The cost numbers alone are staggering in their contrast. The Gripen's operating cost runs approximately $8,000 to flight hour. The F-35S runs approximately $33,000 per flight hour. And that figure has been increasing, not decreasing, as the fleet ages. For the cost of one F-35 flight hour, you can fly a Gripen 3 to 4 times in a war of attrition, which is what NATO is preparing for in the Arctic. The Air Force that can fly the most sorties from the most locations at the lowest cost wins. Volume and availability beat theoretical superiority every time. The unit acquisition cost tells a similar story. Roughly $85 million for a Gripen versus approximately $200 million for the life cycle cost of an F-35. when you factor in the sustainment tail, and the Gripen's availability is dramatically higher. While the F-35 fleet manages 55% mission readiness, the Gripen routinely achieves some of the highest operational availability rates in NATO. The numbers don't just favor the Gripen, they devastate the case for the F-35 inches any theater where cost, availability, and dispersed operations matter, which is to say the theater where the actual war is most likely to be fought. The British dimension is what transforms the Gripen from a Swedish national fighter into a European weapons system. The MBDA Meteor missile is the crown jewel, a UK-led six-nation consortium project that produced what the International Institute for Strategic Studies calls arguably the most capable air-to-air missile currently in service on Western combat aircraft. Ramjet-powered, meaning it generates thrust all the way to the target instead of coasting on momentum like traditional rocket-powered missiles. Speed Mach 4 and above, range over 200 kilometers. The largest no-escape zone of any Western air-to-air missile. Once the Meteor is tracking you, the area of sky in which you can't outrun it is larger than for any competing weapon. The Gripen was the first fighter in the world to launch Meteor, achieving initial operational capability in 2016. The F-35 still hasn't integrated it. Current plans suggest 2027 at the earliest, meaning the $2 trillion fighter cannot fire the missile that the $85 million fighter has carried for a decade. But the British connection goes far deeper than missiles. Martin Baker of the UK provides the ejection seats. British companies supply landing gear, advanced sensors, and countermeasure systems. In November 2025, the UK and Sweden conducted Viking flame trials at RAF Coningsby, joint next-generation electronic warfare testing using the Gripen as the platform. The UK's Empire Test Pilot School has operated the Gripen since 1999, giving the UK 25 years of institutional experience with the aircraft. DOID estimated the Gripen program generates between 1.1 and 3 billion pounds in British gross economic value. This isn't a Swedish plane with some British spare parts bolted on. This is a Swedish-British weapon system, Swedish airframe, British weapons, British seats, British sensors, British countermeasures tested at a British Air Force base. And in May 2025, the Gripen added a capability that no other frontline fighter has demonstrated. Through Project Beyond, a partnership with German AI firm Helsing, the Gripen-E was flown autonomously by artificial intelligence in live beyond visual range combat scenarios. The first known instance of a frontline fighter executing AI-directed combat maneuvers in actual flight. The AI executed complex engagements, provided real-time firing cues, and demonstrated adaptive tactical decision-making. The Gripen's modular software architecture allowed AI integration without compromising safety-critical flight controls, an advantage that rigid systems like the F-35's tightly coupled software cannot easily replicate. The Gripen-E became the first fighter in history flown by artificial intelligence in live combat, not in simulation, not in a Pentagon briefing room in the air. In February 2026, Sweden deployed Gripens to Iceland to lead NATO's Arctic air policing, the first time in history that Sweden's Skaraborg air flotilla contributed a fighter unit to a NATO operation. The Swedish Gripens were also deployed to Poland in 2025 for NATO's eastern flank enhanced air policing. Joint UK-Sweden air patrols under Operation Chessman have operated from Malmö, Poland for 2 consecutive years. RAF Typhoons and Swedish Gripens flying side by side, testing interoperability and building the operational relationships that form the foundation of the emerging Northern European air defense architecture. The fighter design for frozen roads is now patrolling the frozen north. The fighter designed for billion-dollar air bases is having its engines delivered 155 days late, and the order book reflects the shift with unmistakable clarity. Sweden has ordered 60 Gripen-E for its own air force. Brazil has 36 and conducted its first Meteor missile firing from a Gripen in November 2025, demonstrating that the Swedish-British weapon system works on another continent in a different hemisphere for a different kind of air force. Colombia signed for 17 inches a $3.1 billion deal in November 2025, choosing the Gripen over American, European, and Korean competitors. Thailand bought 4, and then there's Ukraine. In October 2025, Ukraine issued a letter of intent for up to 150 Gripen E, what would be the largest fighter order in Europe, larger than many NATO air forces in their entirety. Ukraine doesn't need a stealth fighter that costs $33,000 an hour to fly and requires pristine air bases that Russian missiles would destroy in the first salvo. Ukraine needs a fighter that can fly from any road, rearm in 10 minutes, and carry the most lethal air-to-air missile available to Western forces. The Gripen was literally designed for Ukraine's exact operational requirements, a war of survival against a larger adversary fought from dispersed locations with no guarantee that any airbase would survive the next hour. If the Ukrainian order materializes, it would transform the Gripen from a Nordic niche product into one of the most widely deployed fighters in European defense. Canada, which is only 16 F-35S on firm commitment out of a planned 88 jet purchase, is reconsidering with Saab in active talks with Canadian industry about domestic production partnerships. Portugal is evaluating European alternatives. Saab's 2025 year-end report showed record order bookings, the highest in the company's history. Every grip and order is an F-35 order. That didn't happen. And the orders are accelerating. The Pentagon isn't watching this passively. It's scrambling, and the nature of the scramble reveals just how seriously Washington takes the threat. Senior defense officials have been dispatched to Nordic capitals Stockholm, Helsinki, Oslo, Copenhagen, and London, carrying the same message they've carried for 15 years. Block 4 is coming. TR-3 will be fixed. The F-35 will deliver on its promises. Stay in the program. The problem is that allies have heard this pitch for a decade, and every promised timeline has been missed. Every cost estimate has been exceeded. The credibility of F-35 promises is at an all-time low. The Pentagon is applying particular pressure on Finland, NATO's newest member, which has 64 F-35S on order, not to deepen its partnership with Sweden's Gripen program. Similar pressure is being applied to Norway and Canada. But the pitch is getting harder to make. The F-35 will be great eventually is not a compelling argument when the Gripen is available today, proven in combat exercises, armed with the best air-to-air missile in NATO, and sitting on the tarmac at a quarter of the cost. The Pentagon is also offering unprecedented pricing concessions, discounts on F-35 orders for wavering allies that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Accelerated delivery timelines are being promised, though analysts are skeptical given ongoing block for delays. And the most revealing concession, enhanced technology transfer, more access to F-35 software code, more local maintenance authorization, reduced dependency on Lockheed's Fort Worth facility. Allies have been asking for this software access for years and were told it wasn't possible. Now, under competitive pressure from the Gripen, the Pentagon is suddenly willing to share. The access that was impossible when you had no alternative became available the moment you did. When the Pentagon starts offering discounts in technology transfer on its most advanced fighter, it's not being generous. It's competing. And the fact that it has to compete against a Swedish company with a fraction of Lockheed Martin's resources tells you everything about who has the better product. The Pentagon is also rushing F-35 deployments to Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska and other northern installations, attempting to demonstrate Arctic capability that should have been proven years ago. Cold weather testing that was supposed to be complete before the fighter entered full operational service is being rushed through now under competitive pressure, with results being publicized as fast as they can be generated. The Pentagon is trying to prove the F-35 can work in the Arctic. The Gripen was designed for the Arctic from the first line of code and the first rivet in the airframe. There's a fundamental difference between proving and designing, between retrofitting a capability under pressure and building it into the DNA of the aircraft from day one. Meanwhile, Lockheed Martin is running a corporate messaging campaign about F-35 interoperability, arguing that only the F-35 provides seamless integration with American intelligence, surveillance, and command and control networks. The argument is that buying the Gripen means stepping outside the American security umbrella. But the nations buying the Gripen hear that argument differently. They hear buy our product because you can't operate independently without it. For nations seeking strategic autonomy in an era of unpredictable American foreign policy, that isn't a selling point. It's a warning label. Lead is arguing that the F-35's greatest advantage is dependency. The nations buying the Gripen are buying it specifically because it doesn't create dependency. You don't scramble against something that isn't threatening. The Pentagon scrambles when the threat is real, when the market is moving, and when the window to respond is closing. All three are true. And in defense procurement, momentum is destiny. Once a nation's air force is built around a weapon system, once the pilots are trained, the mechanics are certified, the supply chains are established, the industrial partnerships are signed, switching costs become prohibitive. The Pentagon scramble is a race against lock-in, and the Gripen is winning that race. Warren Buffett has spent 60 years studying capital allocation, how organizations invest their resources, and whether those investments produce returns proportional to their cost. When he was asked about the F-35 versus the Gripen, he didn't talk about fighter jets. He talked about capital allocation at the national level. I've spent my career studying capital allocation, Buffett said. How companies invest their money is the single most important determinant of their long-term value. What the F-35 program demonstrates is that governments can misallocate capital on a scale that no private company could survive. $2 trillion over 20 years of development. And the result is a fighter that costs 4 times as much to fly as the Swedish alternative and can't fire the British missile the Swedish alternative has carried for a decade. The Gripen is what happens when you allocate capital efficiently. Small country, limited budget, existential threat. They couldn't afford to waste a single krona. So they built a fighter that works, that's available, that costs $8,000 an hour to fly, and that carries the most capable air-to-air missile in NATO. The F-35 is what happens when there are no budget constraints, no accountability, and no meaningful competition. The results speak for themselves. Buffett drew a parallel to industry disruption. There's a moment in every industry transformation when the incumbent realizes the challenger isn't going away. In computing, it was when IBM realized the personal computer was real. In retail, it was when traditional stores realized Amazon was real. In automotive, it was when legacy manufacturers realized Tesla was real. In defense, it's happening right now. The Pentagon is realizing the Gripen is real. And their response, the scrambling, the discounting, the rush deployments, the PR campaigns about interoperability tells you everything about who's winning. When the incumbent starts offering discounts and dispatching lobbyists, the disruption is already underway. Then the line that drew the sharpest reaction. I own businesses in 60 industries. In every single one of them, the product that costs 4 times as much to maintain and arrives years late gets replaced by the competitor that works. Defense is the only industry where the failing product gets a larger contract instead of a smaller one. That's not a market, that's a protection racket. He paused and added, and the protection racket only works as long as the customers believe they have no alternative. The Gripen just gave them one. Buffett framed the choice in investment terms that his shareholders would understand instantly. Think of a nation's defense budget as a portfolio. Every fighter jet purchase is an investment. The question any rational investor would ask is, what is the return per dollar? The F-35 returns high capability when it works, which is 55% of the time, but also low availability, high maintenance cost, dependency on a single foreign supplier, and political risk that the supplier may change terms based on whoever wins the next American election. The Gripen returns high availability, low-cost sovereign control, compatibility with NATO's best missile, and zero dependency on a foreign government software authorization. If I were allocating capital for a national defense portfolio, I'd choose the investment with the highest return per dollar, the lowest maintenance cost, and the most sovereign control. This isn't simply an opinion about fighter jets. It's investment logic applied to national security. And when you look at the numbers through that lens, the direction becomes obvious. A member of the Berkshire Hathaway board later revealed that Warren Buffett explained it in the simplest possible terms. The countries choosing the Saab JAS 39 Gripen are making the same decision he would make as an investor. They're choosing the defense investment that delivers the greatest return for every dollar spent. The fact that the United States Department of Defense views that decision as a strategic threat says more about the flaws in modern defense procurement than it does about the aircraft themselves. Buffett then made a comment that stuck with everyone in the room. In 60 years of investing, he said, he had never seen a market where the inferior product consistently wins. Defense, he suggested, might be the only industry where that can happen. But even there, that dynamic can't last forever. And the transformation isn't theoretical. It's already happening. The map of northern air power for 2035 is quietly forming right now. Sweden's fleet of 60 Saab JAS 39 Gripen fighters is expected to anchor Nordic air defense while continuing to lead Arctic air policing missions across NATO territory. Finland, the alliance's newest member and the nation with NATO's longest land border with Russia, is deepening its military integration with Sweden even as it maintains its order for the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II. The goal is redundancy and flexibility. Norway is studying whether the Gripen could serve as a complementary platform alongside its existing F-35 fleet, while Denmark continues integrating into the broader Nordic air defense structure. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom remains deeply embedded in the program through the MBDA Meteor missile, the Viking Flame electronic warfare trials, and decades of joint aviation research. If Ukraine follows through on its letter of intent to purchase up to 150 Gripen fighters, it would field one of the largest combat aircraft fleets in Europe outside the major powers. The emerging system isn't controlled by a single country anymore. Instead, it's becoming a distributed consortium. A Swedish airframe, British weapons, German artificial intelligence, and operational cooperation between Nordic and NATO partners. In this new architecture, the Pentagon is still present, but it is no longer the sole architect. And that shift is about something deeper than fighter jets. It's about sovereignty. Nations operating the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II remain tied to American authorization systems, software approvals, and logistics networks that ultimately depend on decisions made in Washington. Nations flying the Saab JAS 39 Gripen operate under a different principle. Their software is sovereign. Their weapons integration is sovereign. No foreign government has the authority to disable the aircraft's core capabilities. In a geopolitical environment where alliances can shift with elections and policy priorities can change overnight, that independence has become more valuable than stealth coatings or classified sensors. Nowhere is that reality clearer than in the Arctic. Since 2014, Russia has dramatically expanded its northern military infrastructure, reopening Arctic bases, deploying SAF 400 air defense system batteries along the polar coastline, and increasing Arctic air patrols by more than 300%. As melting ice opens the northern sea route to commercial shipping, the region is rapidly evolving from a remote frontier into a strategic economic corridor. NATO needs aircraft that can survive in that environment, fighters capable of operating from frozen highways, remote airstrips, and temporary dispersal sites where they can land, refuel, rearm, and launch again before an enemy can target them. The Arctic is not a stealth contest. It is a persistence contest. The side that can keep the most aircraft in the air from the most locations for the longest time at the lowest cost will dominate the theater. And in that kind of war, the persistence advantage increasingly belongs to the Gripen. If the trend continues, the consequences extend far beyond aircraft sales. The United States risks losing a degree of strategic influence across Northern Europe as allied nations adopt defense systems that no longer depend on American authorization or logistics chains. Industrial revenue that once flowed primarily to companies like Lockheed Martin and Pratt Whitney could gradually shift toward European firms such as Saab, MBDA, and Helsing. The intelligence networks built around shared American equipment may become more decentralized as allies field their own independent sensor and communication systems. The Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II was originally intended to cement American leadership in NATO air power for the next half century. Instead, the program's escalating costs, delays, and operational challenges opened the door for an alternative. Sweden's Gripen, armed with the Meteor missile, enhanced with German AI, designed for highway operations, and costing roughly $8,000 per flight hour compared to the F-35's $33,000, stepped through that opening with a system that works today. In February 2026, Gripen fighters deployed to Iceland to lead NATO's Arctic air policing mission for the first time in history. Since then, orders and negotiations have spread across multiple continents. Ukraine's potential 150 jet purchase alone could redefine the balance of European air power. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has responded with intense lobbying, unprecedented pricing concessions, accelerated Arctic deployments, and renewed promises that future upgrades, particularly Block 4, will finally unlock the F-35's full capabilities. Buffett summarized the situation with characteristic bluntness. The F-35, he argued, represents the most extreme example of capital misallocation in government history. The nations choosing the Gripen are simply applying the same investment discipline that any rational portfolio manager would use, maximizing capability, minimizing cost, and maintaining control over the asset. The shift underway across Northern Europe reflects that logic. For 75 years, NATO's northern air defense was built around American aircraft, American supply chains, and American command architecture. The F-35 was meant to extend that structure well into the 21st century. Instead, it created the conditions for something new, a European-led system built on shared technology, distributed partnerships, and sovereign control. The F-35 will remain a major force in global aviation for decades, but the trajectory is becoming increasingly clear. Its market share is tightening while the Gripen's is expanding. The Pentagon now finds itself competing in markets where it once dictated terms. And the nations forming NATO's northern flank are quietly constructing an air defense ecosystem that no longer requires American permission to operate. The question now isn't whether the transformation has begun, it's whether anyone can reverse it. Judging by the Pentagon's urgency, the discounts, the diplomatic pressure, the rushed Arctic demonstrations, the answer may already be visible. The map of northern air power is being redrawn in real time. Every time a Gripen lifts off from a frozen highway, another line on that map shifts. The aircraft that was meant to lock NATO into American air power may instead have pushed the alliance to build its own alternative. And the system replacing it, a Swedish airframe, British weapons, and German artificial intelligence, doesn't need permission from anyone to fly.